Treasurer, these figures today, talking about the benefits of the stimulus and also where we're up to in terms of JobKeeper, there's a great relief knowing that the economy now is $100 billion bigger than what it could be.
Well, that's just in 2021 alone, Chris, and that's a result of JobKeeper and our other economic support programs. The fact is, JobKeeper was one of the most successful economic support programs in Australia's history. At a time that the economy was in free fall, JobKeeper put a floor under the economy. It saved more than 700,000 jobs and it supported the recovery. And a very clear indicator of that success has been the fact that the unemployment rate has now got down to 4.6%, which is at a 12-year low. So it really did support particularly small businesses. 97% of all JobKeeper recipients were small businesses, and they certainly benefited from that economic program.
What about that other 3%? Should they be giving up their money, their profits, their JobKeeper?
Well, nearly 2% of those were not-for-profit businesses, many that provide essential services across our community. They were charities. And with respect to the larger businesses, they were a small fraction of the recipients of JobKeeper. Now, there's also some additional new Treasury analysis that shows of the businesses that did not see the anticipated decline in turnover of 30 or 50%, they were overwhelmingly small businesses. 99% of those recipients of JobKeeper who did not see that full turnover decline were actually small businesses with an average of 4 employees. They're the ones that the Labor Party are now going after. And the reality is these businesses wouldn't have been able to keep their doors open. These businesses wouldn't have been able to keep their staff on if it wasn't for programs like JobKeeper.
Can I turn to China now? You wrote something recently about how business needs to look beyond China and understand the threat that China poses. And Beijing didn't take it too well, as we know. But today, the Lowy Institute has described what you said as the most important foreign policy speech by a cabinet minister this year. Do business do business understand, though, that they have to seek out better leads, better relationships elsewhere?
I think business is becoming increasingly aware of that reality. And what I was saying in that speech is that our economic interests and policies were increasingly overlapping into the security sphere, and that Australia had been targeted by China's economic coercion. Our exports like barley, like beef, like wine, like coal had been subject to these restrictions. But our economy had been remarkably resilient, Chris, and we had been able to find new markets for those exports, so much so that we saw in June a record trade surplus in Australia. And a good illustration of that changing dynamic in our export trade was that we saw over the last year 30 million less tonnes of coal going from Australia to China, but 28 million more tonnes of coal going from Australia to other countries. And for example, with barley, we found new markets in Saudi Arabia, with wine in Singapore and in Germany. So it's really important that just as the government is encouraging the diversification of markets by business, that business does everything in its power to follow suit.
You would have been happy with Gladys Berejiklian's roadmap out of lockdown at 70% fully vaxxed. Is there a message there for other premiers, do you think?
Well, I support what Gladys Berejiklian is doing in New South Wales. She has outlined, I think, a cautious roadmap and one that's consistent with the national plan agreed by National Cabinet. And it is really important that we give people hope, that Australian businesses know that they'll be able to reopen their doors, that families know that their kids will be able to get to school, and that there will be a payoff for getting vaccinated, namely that you will see an easing of restrictions in a COVID-safe way in accordance with that national plan. And it's important that the country reopens up as a whole. And I welcome the announcement in Victoria just the other day that regional parts of the state will no longer be subject to the same restrictions that the urban and Melbourne areas have been. It's really important that Victoria, like New South Wales, start to ease restrictions when we get to that 70 to 80% vaccination rates.
Just a quick comment on WA and their budget handed down yesterday. Mark McGowan is cock-a-hoop and saying that, well, see, we don't need to open our borders to the eastern states to keep economically sound. What's your message to him?
Well, firstly, he's obviously benefiting from very high iron ore prices, more than $11 billion flowing out of royalties from that commodity alone. And that's, welcome, not just in Western Australia, it adds to the federal coffers as well. But my message to Mark McGowan is that he agreed to a deal at National Cabinet and he should stick to that deal. And it's in the best interests of his state. One of the common refrains we hear from Western Australian businesses is about labour force shortages and the fact that they can't necessarily get the workers in their booming mining or construction industries. We also know that tourism businesses in WA, Chris, are doing it tough because of the lockdowns in New South Wales and Victoria, but also the closed borders. And we recently partnered with the McGowan government to provide economic support to those tourism businesses. So I would say to Mark McGowan, as I would say to Anastasia Palaszczuk, don't delay the inevitable. You will have to learn to live with COVID, and it's in the economic interests of your state that you open up in accordance with that plan.
Treasurer, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy your weekend.
My pleasure. Nice to be with you and your viewers.